As of now, we're 107 days away from the first World Cup game, and it's just been a lot of like talk about these ticket prices. So I guess for you, just what was your initial reaction to these high ticket prices?
So the you can ask yourself, why are we seeing World Cup ticket prices so high? Uh, but it would be a reasonable question to also ask, why have ticket prices been so low historically as well, right? And I think what we're seeing in the World Cup is that we're simply getting the World Cup catching up to other major events in terms of ticket prices, right? So this is not just a World Cup thing. Go try to buy tickets for, Taylor Swift or Noah Khan or any of these sort of things, and you'll see tickets that are every bit what we're seeing in the World Cup. The other thing that we're seeing for sure, which is certainly makes sense from an economic standpoint, is a move to dynamic ticket pricing, and of course I mean, there's two sorts here, right? There's ticket pricing that at least takes into account right from the beginning differences between team qualities, and that's especially important in this World Cup where we've expanded to 48 teams, but soccer hasn't gotten any better, right? So the additional 16 teams we added were not Brazil's and England's, right? They were their Uzbekistan's and their Hades and their Cape Verde's, right? So in a world like that, you should be pricing tickets significantly differently, and moving away from kind of a one price model, which was closer to what we saw in previous games. And again, uh, similar note, in a world where there are more and more people every year, with more and more money, and more ease of travel, it makes sense that the World Cup is in higher demand year after year, and I think the higher ticket prices are just a reflection of that.
Yeah, so I'm glad you went to the dynamic pricing aspect because I guess for me, this is a relatively new concept. But I'm sure for the World Cup in Qatar, for a marquee group game, like let's say Portugal versus South Korea, for example, I'm sure that game was still going to be more expensive than another random group game. So how is dynamic pricing different to that sort of difference?
So I can't answer that for sure. I know that. So I was at the Women's World Cup in Australia, and there didn't appear to be any type of what's known as variable pricing. So let's just define these two terms. So variable pricing is pricing where you set a different price for your product depending on your guess as to how popular the game is going to be. So FIFA's always had at least some level of variable pricing. The finals always been more than other things. I was at the 1994 games, the 1994 World Cup, and I went to the opener, and so that was $100 instead of 50, and games with the U.S. in them were $60, and these are for the top level tickets, right? So that's variable pricing where you try to guess ahead of time how much demand there's going to be for your product, and you set the prices ahead of time differently for marquee games versus regular games. And they were doing that even again 30 years ago. They're doing that to some extent. Dynamic pricing means that you don't just set the prices once based on your pre-existing guesses about what demand is going to be like. You slowly release tickets at a variety of prices. You use statistical analysis basically, or business analysis or market analysis of that demand as it comes in order to then allow the ticket prices to adjust in real time based on the demand you're experiencing. So you release a fraction of tickets and see if they get taken up super fast or not at a certain price. If they all go immediately, then you raise your prices and you keep doing that, and you observe how demand holds up. If no one's buying at the price you have, then you lower those prices. So again, this is dynamic pricing that's allowed to change in real time. The fact that we now are buying everything on electronic platforms allows you to, observe these in a way that was different, back 50 years ago when you lined up at the ticket office and you bought a paper ticket. The fact that you're constantly providing data to the computer systems allows you to have the data you need to adjust prices to variable pricing.
So specifically for like the US, what role do these third-party ticket websites like StubHub, Ticketmaster, what effect do they have on this trend that we're seeing?
Well, so certainly those sort of platforms are providing information back to FIFA about what they can sell these tickets for, right? So and again, it's not just FIFA. There were lots of folks. I mean, Bruce Springsteen's the one I really comes to mind because he was one of the last holdouts to say, look, I really want to provide cheap tickets to my fans. I don't want my fans to pay $500. I want my fans to pay $50. I don't need the money, and I just want to reward my fans with an affordable experience. But of course, what he was finding is he was selling tickets for 50 or $80. And then but they're all being bought by Russian bots who would then resell them back on StubHub or any of the ticket resale sites, and so his fans were paying $400 anyway. It's just that the people making money from this were ticket resellers in Russia or in China or your choice, not actually the the fans weren't getting cheap tickets, and so he's like, well, if tickets are going to sell for $400, I might as well take that money rather than some ticket scalping site. So, quite honestly, if you've got money, StubHub is one of the greatest things ever because it means that nothing anymore is ever sold out, and the people who value the product most can get in. It's not great for a person who, in the old days, was getting a $20 ticket that was really worth $100, but they got it for $20 through luck or through lining up ahead of time or things like this. But it does serve to get tickets in the hands of the people who value them most.
Yeah, I guess you see a lot of that these days where the stadium or sports league will announce a sellout, but you just look around the stadium and you can tell that there are empty seats.
Well, that's terrible, right? From an economic standpoint, having seats stay empty because FIFA has overpriced these tickets. That's awful from a societal standpoint. That's kind of the worst of monopoly pricing. Again, the hope is with dynamic pricing that actually doesn't happen, in that they lower the prices in those games that there's not high demand for. An Algeria versus Austria sort of game, you lower those prices. But a France versus Norway, Mbappe versus Haaland, and those sort of games, you'll charge a lot for. And again, it's the players and FIFA who's putting that event on. As long as the taxpayers aren't subsidizing things, there's really no reason FIFA shouldn't be extracting as much money as people are willing to pay.
So I've seen there has been a lot of anger from a lot of people about these ticket prices, but realistically, can FIFA make these tickets more cheaper, or is it just like you're saying, supply and demand? There's such a huge demand for these games that tickets are going to be high.
Really all depends, right? And if we see tickets being sold for if FIFA settles on a price of $1,000 and we see stadiums that are half full, then all of that anger is justified. On the other hand, if we see tickets being sold for $300, $400 and they all sell, it's really hard for people to get angry about that because if you have a good that is scarce and more people want the tickets than are available for them at a given price, you got two choices. Either raise the price until the supply equals demand, or you have to figure out some other way to allocate these, and that's not necessarily fair either, right? People who are lucky, people who happen to, be able to press the button for Ticketmaster faster than someone else. Is that fair? People who line up and camp out for 3 days, that's not fair to me. I have an actual job, right? Why should that be fair? So once you have more people who want a good than there is good available, you're going to have to figure out how to allocate them. Most economists suggest that the best way to do that is through prices. No one says it's unfair that a Lamborghini is $250,000 and I can't afford one, right? They say, well, it's $250,000 because that's expensive, and there's not many of them, and this we're not talking about healthcare. We're not talking about education or food here. We're talking about a ticket to watch a soccer game.
Right. And then another one here, which I didn't have until this weekend, obviously, but this is a developing situation. But the scenes we're seeing out in Mexico, just from an economic perspective, what challenges is FIFA facing looking at can we even host these games in Mexico? Do we have to move them to Canada or the USA?
Yeah, so I mean, this is always an issue, right? You always have an issue with major events that you can have things out of your control affect demand for it. There was questions about whether LA was going to be able to host its events when they had the massive fires, right? There are questions about whether visitors to the United States are going to feel safe given immigration crackdowns, right? So these are all things that obviously worry FIFA. There's concerns of World Cup in Brazil, which took place in places very, very high crime cities like Rio and Sao Paulo. Worries about South Africa over the same thing. Worries about crackdowns on gay and lesbian folks in Qatar, or problems with mafia in Russia. So again, all of these cases are always a concern. You should never feel sorry for FIFA because FIFA's FIFA. But you can kind of feel sorry for them. They said, look, how can we get a better place than the United States to come? It's a big place, lots of tourist infrastructure. It's safe. There's no corruption. Everything's fine. And then all of a sudden they end up with Trump, and they end up with, Trump threatening threatening teams, threatening tourists, threatening venues, right? And so, this is just one of these things that is a problem. Um, uh, yeah, I would be concerned if I was FIFA about the violence associated with this. I would also say that we've got 6 months for that violence to tamp down, and typically we've seen significant reductions in violence and crime around mega events because countries try very hard to make sure that these things go without a hitch. That being said, we had a dozen Israeli athletes assassinated in 1972 at the Olympics. We had a bomb go off in 1996 at the Olympics. So these things are targets, and that's always a concern.
Yeah, definitely a situation to monitor. Lastly, I watched your sit down with Bob Macon. You mentioned that
Yeah, yeah.
Chicago, like the third biggest city in the USA, not bidding for the World Cup. What goes into a city deciding we don't want to host the biggest event in the world?
Well, I think the question is, what are they going to get out of it versus what is it going to cost them, right? And often FIFA is very demanding in what it expects out of the cities in terms of money, in terms of security, in terms of handing over, their stadiums, their convention centers, things like this, and FIFA is often not a very good partner to work with that way, and Chicago decided that's not what we want to do, is that we could easily end up spending millions of dollars in security and other costs for something that actually doesn't help us a lot. And of course, one of the reasons it might not help you is, yeah, you're going to have cities full full of soccer fans for the month of June. But that also doesn't leave very big windows for anything else that would normally be going on. You basically, any World Cup city can't host a major convention during the World Cup because there are no windows. There are no even 2 or 3 day windows to between games that you can use your cities for those sort of business travel, right? Cities like Chicago, Boston, New York, LA, all the cities that are hosting are big tourist destinations in the summer anyway. So you expect your hotels to be pretty full regardless. And they might be full of folks who would be spending money that is more beneficial to your city, right? So, if you're Chicago and you have someone coming in, you want people to be spending hundreds of dollars on Chicago stuff, right? The Chicago restaurants, Chicago theaters, Chicago, unique Chicago shopping. You don't want people spending hundreds of dollars that just goes into FIFA's pockets and then leaves town with that. So, it's I don't know that Chicago made the right move, but it's not obviously a bad one.
Okay, makes sense. Well, that's all I have. Doctor, if you want to tell the viewer where people can find more of your work.
Sure. So again, I'm Victor Matheson. I'm a professor of economics at the College of the Holy Cross. Google is your friend. More than happy to find me. I have some working papers that are available directly. If you Google Victor Matheson World Cup, you should be able to find some papers on the economics of the World Cup. Also, another paper on a similar topic, going for the gold, talking about the economics of the Olympics, touches on a lot of the same issues, and that was published in the Journal of Economic Perspectives, which is free to anyone who wants to track that down.